Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to host the first, and definitely not the last, English debate in the Center for Totalitarian Studies. And my name is Wojciech Kozłowski, and I'm a pleasure and honor to be a program director of the center. And I'm really happy to see so many of you from different places, different institutions, and representing also cultural institutions, museums, etc., and also people from prominent publishing houses that are also here. And I hope that this conversation, this debate we're going to have today, is something that that all of you will find rewarding and perhaps even inspiring. So my desire is to extend a gracious welcome and inclusive welcome to all of you. Since I have the honor to be the moderator of the discussion today, so I thought that I would take this opportunity, and before I introduce our distinguished speakers, I'm very happy that they gathered here to our invitation, and they responded so generously to it. I would like to say a few words for those who are not perhaps very familiar with the center. This is still a new institution. Relatively speaking, it's almost 12 years old, so it's a kind of a toddler right now, making this kind of childish metaphor. But one of the important elements of the center's mission is to ensure worldwide access to the 20th century Polish memory, history, and culture. And part of that particular mission is the debate today. I mean, we're trying to pursue that goals in various fields in different ways. And we believe that also inviting foreign scholars and creating here at the center sort of platform for interaction, for exchange of thoughts, for international discussion, is a part of our mission. The other element that is very closely linked, and I'm right now particularly talking about the center's outreach policy, that means the one that goes beyond Polish borders, is also very much related to our flagship project, which is Chronicles of Terror, which tries to document the Polish experience of two totalitarian regimes and include that particular memory and documentation into the memory of the world. And this is going to be, in the hopefully nearest future, the largest to-be collection of civilian accounts of the Second World War Europe, available online and available in English. And this is something which I consider kind of very great breakthrough in terms of studying the history, not only kind of Polish history, but regional history of Central Europe. Because this material, although known to historians, especially Polish historians, but this particular material is, well, scattered and hidden, we would say, in various archives. And, well, if you put it online and if you put it in the transcribed version and nicely and properly translated, on the other hand, fully searchable, this material becomes quickly, easily accessible worldwide. And I think that's what matters, really. And then I believe that the global perspective, Polish history is not really trying to sort of force itself into the world. It just makes it available. And from what I hear on different occasions from very different people from all continents, you tell me one thing: just please let us get the access to your source material. We're not going to learn Polish, they say it explicitly, we're not going to learn Polish. And I started understanding that. Actually, you don't really have to. But we want to read about it. And we are very happy to pursue studies, to do some research, to do some scholarly work, but give us the material. And then I say, but it's not enough. I want you to put it on syllabus, on your syllabi, on different curricula across universities. That's what matters. They say, okay, I can do it. Give me the material. So the center is actually trying to do that. And we're going to bring that material. We want to bring not really the interpretation, because the historians, and I mean many people, scholars, hate when you tell them what to think and what to do. But they're very happy if they see, the wide variety of material that they can reach for. And that's where we try to sort of come forward and say, look, that's what we've done. Now it's your turn just to read it, what worked. Today's debate, Polish history in global perspective and understanding the 20th century, was, to our understanding in the center, a very important, starting point or a kickoff for what we are trying to do here and what we are trying to inspire other scholars and other, perhaps, environments to get interested in, meaning there is, and not only in Polish history, I would say it's quite remarkably visible and evident in American history, that there is something like the historical exceptionalism. Something that says that, and I'm not taking Polish example, I'm using American example, that there is the United States and it has its unique destiny. Something special in human history that is like Ronald Reagan would say that America is still the shining town on the top of the hill. Or actually shining city, not a town, sorry. That's a bad quotation. All right, so there is the element of exceptionalism, trying to say, look, our history is unique and it's completely different, and you have to praise that history because of the very fact that it's unique and different than any other. And it happens in different places of the world. There's another trend, would say, and we know it very well from our particular everyday life. I mean, there is the national history, which is a fundament for historical education. I mean, if we learn history, we learn basically the history of our own countries and states and nations. So is this perspective saying, like, we're in one box, we learn our history, and then since we hear little about the history outside, then we get this impression that all perspectives are our perspectives, and whatever happens outside has to be viewed from what we do and how we perceive the global history, the history of humanity. So we have that strands, but on the other hand, there is growing, for a number of years, growing internationalization of discourse, of scholarly discourse, where more and more people will communicate in English, they will do research in English, and they will, in fact, communicate with one another in that language. And this sort of breaks through those traditional, conventional ways of viewing national histories as the only perspective that we can assume. And finally, there's world history. World history, which, as far as I know, in the United States actually replaced the courses in Western civilizations. There's no more Western civilization, there's global history. And we want to teach multicultural histories from various places. And then we have this kind of idea that there is one big history of humankind. And then there's a question, okay, and where is our story? Where is our story within that big narrative? Having said that, the very starting point for this conversation, for this debate, is what can be said about Polish history from this outside of the box. When we go beyond that and we want to say, okay, where does it fit? How this history fits into this global perspective? Whether there is any need for it fitting into something, or this is just this kind of revealing element that helps a lot to understand, in this case, the 20th century. So this is kind of starting question. I'm coming to an end because this was my speech, and my speech was I promise you, the most boring one. Now we will proceed to our speakers, and they will entertain us, I believe very much. Let me just quickly introduce them to you, and I will introduce them in alphabetical order, and in the order they're going to speak. First, Professor Richard Butterwick-Pawlikowski, who is the European Civilization Chair at College of Europe in Natoli, here, not far from the city center, but at the same time he is on leave from the School of Slavonic and Eastern European Studies at UCL, University College London, where he is from 2013 a professor of Polish-Lithuanian history. We're going to talk about 20th century. And Professor Butterwick told me, look, I'm not a specialist in the 20th century, but he is a specialist in 18th century Polish history and actually in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And I said, actually, this is very important perspective I want to bring into the debate. That's why he is here. And you'll be surprised in his remarks concerning the 20th century. Also in 2016, he was awarded the Bronze Medal Gloria Artis for his services to Polish culture. And he, as I said, is a specialist mostly in the Enlightenment, in its critics, and also in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Then, welcome to the debate.
Thank you.
Professor Alexandra Richie. She is a professor of history and international affairs and director of the Institute of International Affairs and Sustainable Development and the Collegium Civitas University in Warsaw. But there's only one of her preoccupations that she follows. I'm not going to list all of them. She actually graduated from Oxford with her PhD exactly the same as Richard, if I'm not confusing something, because, yeah. But she's also distinguished author. There are two books of her that are very famous. Faust Metropolis, A History of Berlin, which was awarded and was a best-selling book, and also... That's okay. And also the other book, which was, as far as I know, it was not translated into Polish. I'm not sure whether the first book was translated into Polish.
No.
No. But this one is Warsaw 1944, became the #1 best-selling book in Poland, and also won a couple of prizes. So she is a kind of distinguished, prominent author on the 20th century history. She also lectures and teaches modern history and politics, interestingly, with the emphasis on defense and security issues. She also is a presidential counselor at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and she also is very much committed to enhancing the teaching and learning in high school, one of the high schools in Canada. And yeah, that's her background in a very brief note. Welcome to the debate. And obviously, last but not least, Professor Klaus Ziemer, who is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Trier, but also he is still active at the Cardinal Wyszyński University in Warsaw. For 10 years, he has been a director of the German Historical Institute in Warsaw, very prominent research place and famous with great scholars. And his research interests include contemporary Polish history, Polish-German relations since 1945, and political transformation in Eastern Europe. Professor Ziemer, I'm very happy you came to us.
Thank you very much.
And with that, I will thank you for your patience, and I would like to invite the first speaker to start.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation. As you've explained to everyone, I'm not a specialist on the 20th century, but one example to underline the relevance of what I do. I frequently encounter in international students, and sometimes in international historians, the conviction that the Polish state, the Polish Republic that was established in 1918, was a new state, as opposed to a reborn state or a restored state. Now, the conviction among the Poles who established or re-established the Polish state in 1918 or between 1918 and 1921 that they were resurrecting the old Commonwealth was overwhelming. There is also a continuity between those who strove to resurrect that state from the late 18th century running right through to the early 20th century. The likes of Bolesław Limanowski, who lived for about 100 years and was very much still around for the creation of the Second Republic, could in his childhood remember veterans of Kosciuszko Rising. So we have this continuity between the First and the Second Republic. That in itself is an indication of why that longer view is important for the 20th century. Now, I'll speak more generally as an Englishman specialising in the history of Poland and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It's fairly normal in Great Britain for academics to specialise in the history of other countries. I believe it should be normal everywhere for academics from different countries to write the history of different countries. And that should also be the case in Poland. And yet very often I encounter a sense of surprise. When a taxi driver tells me, "Isn't it amazing that you, a foreigner, know our history better than I do?" Well, I'm tempted to say, well, I've been practicing for 30 years. It shouldn't be in the least surprising. Now, that's what I would call a very favourable reaction. I'm much less likely to encounter this personally, but perhaps the experience of Professor Ziemer might be different here. Because there is also sometimes a reaction among Poles, as among other countries by analogies. We shouldn't let foreigners write our history for us. The reaction is, we should write our own history and make those foreigners accept our version of our history. But why should they, if it's not a convincing and a plausible version of our history from the Polish perspective? That kind of attitude is usually directed at Germans and Russians rather than British, French, Americans, Canadians. It's sort of embarrassing, but sometimes there's a sense of gratitude that a foreigner deigns to notice Polish history at all. So between these two reactions, it's sometimes quite difficult to get a sort of sense of proportion. Now, it would be something of an exaggeration to suggest that sort of a generation ago in the English-speaking world, there was sort of only one historian of Poland, and that was Norman Davis. But it's undoubtedly the case that in the last 30 years or so, since I started to work on Polish and Polish-Lithuanian history, that the situation has improved immeasurably. And that there are now historians at sort of English-speaking academic institutions in North America and in Europe. Great Britain is still part of Europe. Despite today's events, there are historians who specialise on all periods of Polish history, from the Middle Ages through to the present. I would say that on the whole, at North American universities, there tends to be a better representation of the 19th and 20th centuries, whereas at British universities, it's the early modern period that is better covered. So there is a vast amount more now being written in English, and the English in which these works are being written is rather better than the kind of translations that were being published a generation ago. And, for example, the course that I was teaching at UCL on Polish history between 1648 and 1921 has a course guide and bibliography that runs to 50 pages. Far too much for any one student to get a hand on. And that's just work in English. To start with, I put a few works in French into the list, but it's obvious that hardly any students know French these days, so there wasn't much point. And in any case, there is now more than enough in order to teach the history and the culture of Poland available in English. And the success of the course on Polish culture at Cambridge, conducted by Dr. Stanley Bill, is one indication of that. And now, some of this research is, and some of this more popular history is written by people such as myself, such as Alexandra, in English. And some of it is written by Polish scholars writing in Polish, and it's then translated. I've said the quality of these translations has come on a lot in the last 50 years. It used to be sort of completely unreadable. And as a result, Polish and Polish-Lithuanian history has become much more mainstream than it was a generation ago. It's now perfectly normal for a conference or a collective volume to include perspectives on or from Poland, and that it is no longer just the one token Eastern European. Now, but having said all that on the positive side, I do think there is a great deal more to do when it comes to the internationalization and the normalization of Polish history and Polish historians within what we might call sort of global academic discourse. It's at conferences in Poland, it does seem to be the same foreigners who get invited to speak time and time again. At conferences abroad, it does seem to be the same Polish historians who get invited to speak over and over again. Okay, it's wider than it was in the 1980s when you could count them on one hand, but nevertheless, it's still much too narrow. The works published in English by Anglophone historians of Poland tend to figure in Polish historians' bibliographies. But apart from one footnote in the introduction when they mention that such a work exists, they very rarely get engaged with in the body of the text itself, even when the thesis of such a book is directly challenging a prevalent orthodoxy. So I've always been very careful to made a point of publishing in Polish as well as in English, and I think it's because of that that I get noticed by Polish historians perhaps rather more often than some colleagues who are better historians than myself, but who don't publish as much in Polish as I do. So that is something to think about. On top of that, we have to contend with a certain stereotypical compartmentalization of national historiographies. In Polish historiography, we have the following authors, and then in a whole series of foreign historiographies, we have the following authors. It's as if there are no major divisions among Polish historians and no parallels between the positions of foreign historians with different schools in Polish historiography. This was even the case at the first Congress of Foreign Historians of Poland in Krakow about a decade ago, when we got papers, for example, on Polish history and Hungarian historiography. Now, what's the point of organizing historiography in such a way? My classic response to this is, okay, which national historiography do you put Karin Friedrich into? Okay, is she German, American, British, Scottish, Bavarian, Royal Prussian, or Polish? There is no satisfactory answer to that question. So it should be about the merit of what is being argued on the basis of the reliability of the interpretation of the sources and the innovativeness of the interpretation that's being advanced, rather than ascribing a certain national point of view just because someone comes from a particular country or works in a particular country. So, and among Poles specialising in the history of other countries, there is a sort of a disturbing tendency to publish very little in the languages of those countries, or in the international language, lingua franca, which is English. So, for example, what is the point of publishing a fat research monograph on medieval Scandinavia in Polish? How many Polish Scandinavian specialists are there? How many international Scandinavian specialists can read Polish? Okay, you've got 10 readers for such a book. So, what is the point of doing that? The answer I received is, because it's a habilitacja book. Well, okay, that's the point. If this is a good book, then it's a good book that's completely wasted. If it's a bad book, then it's been published in Polish so that the people who really know about the subject won't read it, and that the person in question will get a degree. Now, that is an example of a systemic problem that affects Polish historians who work on the history of other countries. Far too few of them are trying to publish in the best international journals or to publish books in the languages and to get those books distributed in the relevant countries. Now, of course, most research, detailed research on Polish history or Polish-Lithuanian history should indeed be published in Polish, because that is the lingua franca of researchers. In this case, I think the general history of the experience of totalitarianism is one thing, but anyone who works specifically on Poland simply has to learn the Polish language in order to do the job properly. So, summing this up, I think Polish history and Polish historians are much better integrated into global academic discourse than they were a generation ago, but there's still a lot to do.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to proceed to Alexandra.
Thank you. I agree with so much of what you said. I just feel like I'm going to hand it over to you. But I completely agree. First of all, I'm delighted, absolutely delighted to be at this center. I think it's an amazing place. I think it's doing exactly the right thing, which is, you talked a lot about language. I think language is absolutely fundamental to breaking Polish history out into the international sphere. And this is one of the things we're doing, because unfortunately there are an awful lot of scholars who, for example, work on the Second World War, who are not going to be able to learn Hungarian, Polish, German, and all the other languages if you've got sources available where, you know, you can call it lazy or not, but the fact is if you've got sources available in English, you can actually use them, which is tremendously important. So I think that the purpose of this center is something which should be supported by scholars everywhere, and the idea of opening Polish sources of these incredibly important times to the English-speaking world is very, very vital. I've also had some of the experiences you've had as a non-Polish, and I have no Polish background whatsoever, a non-Polish person coming to live here, having learned the language, and I often have people saying, "Why are you living in Poland?" Like, this is a shock. Or, why are you writing about Polish subjects? This is a very strange thing to be doing. And those comments are becoming less and less prevalent. And I agree with you completely that Poland is now on the map. Well, why is that? I mean, there are some very obvious reasons. First of all, language has always been a barrier. But secondly, it's not until 1989 that Polish scholars, conferences, international debate, discussion, open discussion of history was really possible. Of course, there were great Polish scholars in medievalists or others who ended up at Oxford or who ended up teaching all over the world. Fantastic people, very bright. But generally speaking, the open debate and discussion of history simply wasn't possible till the collapse of communism. End of story. And so, I wrote my thesis about the historiography and manipulation of history between East and West Germany. I lived in communist East Germany and in West Germany, and I looked at the way in which history was written in both of those countries. That study would have been impossible in Poland because history was dictated from above and you didn't have a choice. So really everything changes after 1989, and it becomes, and Poland gradually is allowed to be on this international map. And it takes time. So when I first came here, I first came to Poland in 1985, people were like, "Why are you going to Poland?" Very strange thing to do. By now, it's become it's a country in the European Union, it's a country in NATO. People are beginning to understand that the historiography and the experience of the Poles, for example, in the Second World War, was extremely important, not just for Poles, but for all of Europe. And the experience of Poland being divided by the Soviet Union and by Nazi Germany, the experience of the civilians, the experience of the armies going back and forth over this territory, the experience under Stalin, which a lot of Westerners don't realize what happened in 1939 in Poland. They don't realize what happened in 1944 and 45 in Poland. It's such an important history. It's such a traumatic history. And unfortunately, it just hasn't been, in the past, particularly well written about in the West. And I'm very glad to agree with you that now we are getting more and more scholars, more and more interest, more and more people who are actually beginning to learn about what happened in Poland, in Central Europe. It's not just a Polish tragedy. The Second World War was a global tragedy in which Poland and Poles played a very specific and important part in all sorts of spheres of the war, including North Africa, including France and Holland, but of course here and in the Soviet Union as well. So this history is becoming more important, and I've worked for a number of years, as you mentioned, in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Some years ago, there was no mention of Poland at all in any of these huge conferences they have and the publications that they do. All of a sudden, 2 or 3 years ago, there was interest in Central Europe, what happened here, not just the American experience in the war in Pearl Harbor or Normandy, but also, in order to understand what happened in the Second World War, you have to understand what happens in Poland. All of a sudden, this penny has dropped, and now the National World War II Museum next year, for the first time, are starting to send large groups of students to Poland to learn about what happened here. And these sorts of things are happening more and more often. I was just at a meeting of the American Jewish Congress. The head of the American Jewish Congress said, I grew up in a household that viewed Poland as, place of anti-Semitism, a sort of alien place, and now we're opening up an office in Warsaw. Why? And bringing students over and so on. Why? Because we realize the role that Poland played in a mutual and combined history of totalitarianism, history of the Second World War, a history of Europe, a history of the world. And this institution goes some way. It's one part of that puzzle of bringing this tremendously important and vital history to light. But I see it as a very optimistic moment, and that it's just becoming more and more global and more and more interest to the rest of the world. So.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Please, Professor.
Yes, after what we've heard until now, I'll go perhaps in the same way ahead. Poland was not an item when I began studying. I was from Western Germany. Between us and Poland, there was the German Democratic Republic, and Poland was not an item at that time, say at the end of the 1960s. Nobody had an idea what was happening there. It was not interesting. We were dealing with European integration. France, already at school, I had a pen friend from Paris. I was there. The father was in German captivity during the war. Everything was fine, so there was reconciliation, and this looked very fine. And then I was, as a student, active in the Catholic academic parochial in Heidelberg. And Heidelberg, until today, has a partnership with Leipzig. And during the fair in Leipzig, we met there, we could go there, we got a visa at the border for the fair. And during that time, we had common seminars. And during my first seminar in Leipzig, the students from there told us about as they called it, bicycle pilgrimage 2 years ago, which they made on the traces of German occupation in Poland. They met survivors, they were in Auschwitz, they were received by Cardinal Wojtyła, and I was deeply impressed. I did not have any idea about what they were talking. I knew something about occupation policy, but especially on Holocaust. That was what we had dealt with. But then I understood we had so good relationships with France already. Nobody was speaking about Poland, and I understood that there was a white spot in the conscience of German society, and therefore I learned Polish and began studying Polish-German relations. And this was the beginning. At the beginning, it was very difficult. You also had to learn Polish, and you know what I'm speaking about. And the pronunciation is one thing, but the grammar and so on. I facilitated myself this way by marrying a Pole So I had better access to that, and also to the country, of course, which facilitated this by far. And I was studying this, my master thesis. I wrote about the relationship between Piłsudski and Hitler in historiography, but then for reasons of, say, labor market strategy, I made my dissertation and habilitation in political science because of circumstances in my institute in Heidelberg. The PhD was on Africa, but then I returned to Poland and have been dealt with Poland. But what you said, that Poland was not so much in, I experienced when I finished my habilitatia in '86. Klaus von Beimer, a very well-known political scientist, said to me, "You've bad luck." In 1985, everybody is crying for perestroika, and you are coming with Poland. So it was, but this changed very sharply 4 years after, when there was the peaceful revolution in Poland, and competence in Poland was asked. So everybody asked then, at the university at least, what about Poland? Today I know that in historiography there have been long relationships between the stars of historiography in Poland and in Germany. From 1972 on, there has been a common conference on school books in history and geography. It was extremely difficult at the beginning to find a common language here. Today we can't almost understand how difficult this was. I'm just under the impression of how different this is today. I've been to Frankfurt Oder last week, where we had the 4th conference on Polish studies in Germany. Some more than 300 predominantly young people have been there from several domains of humanities, but especially of history. Poland is in, at least at the universities, among young people. And what is, for me, a very nice surprise is more and more young Germans at the universities are learning Polish, at least to a degree that they are able to read Polish. We observe the other way round, the opposite. Less and less Poles are learning German. We have still a bias for the Polish on the Polish side, so this is clear. But this has changed. Poland is interesting. The question is how far beyond academics. You've said at academics it is fine to be specializing in a country's history. Okay. We have founded this German Historical Institute. It was set up in 1993. Before, there had been German Historical Institutes, the first one in Rome in 1888, when the Vatican opened its archives and it became possible to study German history of the Middle Ages. But then after the Second World War, almost each 10 years, an institute in Paris, London, Washington, and the next one was Warsaw in 1993. Before, at communist times, it was almost impossible because there were no free studies and no free communication. But now it was possible. And at the very beginning, after a couple of weeks, I said to my cooperators at that institute, you are 10 young people who are preparing a habilitatia on Polish history, and all of you know that we don't have 10 chairs of Polish history in Germany. So what to do? And we asked about and discussed about this also in the advisory board, and the solution was, it is good to have these people, these German historians there for, say, 5 years. They become specialists of a part of Polish history, but then go back and are a part of the academic community in Germany, specializing rather in European history. There are more and more chairs for European history, and this is now really an asset when you have a strong Polish side among, say, Italian history and so on. And even at the ministry which financed at that time the institute, there was a bureaucrat who told me, I know, when you are a specialist of medieval Italian history of Rome, then you are a specialist of world history. When you are a specialist of French history, then you are a specialist of European history. But when you are specializing in Polish history, you are a very narrow specialist only. And this is to be changed, and it has changed. We are a part of this institute also has the consciousness that Poland is part of Europe, and that Polish history should be seen not only in its relationship to Germany, but in a broader European context. And that is what also the cooperators and collaborators of this institute are doing today. 20th, what is the German approach to Polish history of the 20th century? The first one is, all of a sudden, after World War I, Poland was back again, and this at the cost of Germany, as we know. And there was and this is for us today really important to learn, that in the Weimar Republic, the enemy of the Germans was Poland, which is very surprising. There are books and studies which are showing how the German press was writing on Poland. Politicians, militaries, they spoke about the seasonal state. Poland had to be had to exist only for a certain time, for one season, and this was very far spread, and so far the ground for a very brutal occupational policy in Poland had been prepared before the Nazis came to power. Hitler, for tactical reasons, made after 1934, between 1934 and the end of 1938, he made a propaganda break. What about Poland? But then it came with new force, and this had been prepared before. It is very sad for us today to see this. But we have to be aware of this, and we have to study this. And then, German occupation, what it meant to Poland, this is now clear in the German society at large since the soap opera Holocaust, which was sent in television at the end of the 1970s. Since then, Holocaust has become part of German identity. At school, we are dealing with that, and so on. But until today, most of the Germans are not aware that at least as many civilians of not Jewish origin under German occupation were killed in the occupied Eastern territories. And this is something which we have to teach our society. One thing is, and one of the flashlights is Warsaw Rising. At the moment there is the exposition of Warsaw Rising, which was first shown in Berlin, then in Munich, at the moment in Heidelberg. And I was there when it was opened in Heidelberg. There is a real interest of people. I was asked by a young man after the introduction to this, why did I not hear about that at school? And this is, so people are interested, they want to know, but we still have a lag here, and we have to do, and this is something which Poles and Germans should do in common. We are doing this with this exposition, but this is something which, for instance, the educational plans at German schools have to reconsider. I hope that the German-Polish historical school book, which has been edited last year, will help to give at least teachers who are interested in this item, to give them a certain help. In the meantime, I've been used to thinking in long terms. When I think back about German-Polish relations, when I was a student, and I'm looking at these relations today, I'm very optimist. What about Polish-German relations, say, in one generation? We have to be, quite simply to be continuous in our efforts, and then I'm quite sure that this will be possible. We have been asked by the organizers here what might be a part of Polish history which could be interesting for others in Europe and even beyond. I think this is not only concerning the 20th century. When we look at the 20th century, I think the lesson we all have to draw from that is we had, and especially Poland as a case, Poland got its liberty back in 1918. It lost it in 1939 and only regained it in 1989. In the west of Europe, we were better off after the Second World War. It was Churchill who called for European unification, but I think he had the European continent in mind without Britain. But nevertheless, I must say I was so glad. I was studying in Paris when Britain entered the common market, and I celebrated with British friends of mine in Paris that Britain at last entered, and it is so sad to see what is going on today. I think today the letter has been transferred and given over in Brussels, but let's hope that this is not the end. But I think it would be if Poles had been able to work freely, they would belong to the founding fathers of uniting Europe. People as Józef Ratzinger, as the Paris Kultura, Giedroyć, Mieroszewski, they showed that there were Polish intellectuals who were aware of belonging to the West, of belonging to a united Europe, and I think this is what we are, and I'm very glad that exactly Germany has been supporting after 1989 Polish efforts to join the political West politically, economically, socially, and that Poland is now a part of the West. Of of course, sometimes we see some reflections of nostalgia to some marca, or sometimes even to the liberum veto, but these are rather singular events or incidents. I think one of the lessons in political way is that we should be in a united Europe strongly to defend our values towards the outside and to keep our cultural identity, our national identity, culturally, religiously, and so on, but be strong towards the outside. And what about Polish history, the special tick? This is, in my opinion, the contribution to the idea of freedom. Everybody in the West who has a certain education knows the idea of freedom in the West, beginning with the Magna Carta, habeas corpus, American and French Revolution, and so on. Almost nobody knows neminem captivabimus, nihil novi, and so on. And there you get, for instance, nihil novi, this is more than 200 years before no taxation without representation. Nobody knows this. This is European history. These are European ideas. And I must admit, also in German schools, you ask teachers. Nobody, almost nobody will know this. This is something which we should study in common, because this is common heritage of Europe. We are in common in the European Union, and we are not aware about this outside Poland, of course. And we should see, in my opinion, it would be very interesting to study, I don't know about this, to study how far this has been an original Polish a line of thinking all over the centuries, how far there have been interactions between Polish thinking and influences from the outside. I think this would be fascinating and could enrich our knowledge about ourselves. This is far beyond the 20th century, of course, but a little bit going into your favorite areas.
Thank you very much to all the speakers for all the insights, and I think the first reaction actually is coming from Professor Butterwick regarding this little incursion to his field,
Well,
etc.
Well, I mustn't speak for too long on this. We are supposed to be concentrating on the 20th century, but let's start from the present. Poland is a rather difficult member of the European Union in the perception of every other country in the European Union, and sometimes of itself as well. Now, difficult doesn't necessarily mean wrong. There is a Polish point of view on the voting mechanisms in the European Union, and a Polish point of view on the decision-making mechanisms in the European Union, which has a certain logic to it. And at this point, I think I ought to say something in defence of the original principle behind the liberal veto. And I don't mean the degenerate version of the liberal veto of the middle of the 18th century, which made it impossible for the Polish parliament, the Sejm, to take any decisions at all. I mean the original principle of consensus in decision-making, that it is not enough simply to count up votes so that the most numerous win out over the less numerous. It is important to weigh up the merits behind those opinions and thrash it out in discussion. There is a wonderful Polish phrase, ucieranie się zgody, thrashing out a compromise that somehow represents the most important interests and the general good of everyone concerned. That's the original idea behind the liberal veto. That is the original idea behind the principle of nihil novi. There was a wonderful slogan of Solidarność Niets o nas bez nas, nothing concerning us without our participation. And there is the wonderful slogan of the Union of Lublin between Poland and Lithuania. And that is a union of the free with the free, the equal with the equal. Unia wolnych z wolnymi, równych z równymi. It is with such a constitutional tradition that Poland entered the European Union in 2004. And those who fought so hard, for example, when the Lisbon Treaty was being negotiated, had exactly those principles in mind. So if Poland is sometimes regarded as a difficult member of the European Union, and some aspects of its diplomacy lately certainly leave something to be desired, then there are very important constitutional principles behind that attitude. And those constitutional principles reaching back many centuries into the past. Not just on a comparative basis, we might mention the Hungarian Golden Bull of 1221, as well as the Golden Bull of Charles IV for the Holy Roman Empire, 1354. Then from that time, when Central Europe was really the political and religious centre of gravity of Europe, there are these important constitutional principles reaching back many centuries, and they are behind Poland's sometimes rather difficult behaviour in European politics.
Thank you. Would you like to have...
Yeah, you mentioned, both of you, the important key word of freedom. And that Poland really does stand for the notion of freedom. And I think, when you look at the 20th century, for example, coming to the Warsaw Uprising, just take an example from a foreigner's perspective. It was difficult at the beginning to understand why on earth, 14-year-olds were going out and putting down their lives to fight for Warsaw, because in our sort of cynical age, what were they up to? And it's only getting into the history of the recreation of Poland in 1918, the anger that generation felt that this freedom had been taken away again, and this sort of passion to try and regain it is something that's very, very moving and very, very powerful. But it also goes back to the fact that within the memory, the genetic DNA of Poland was the memory of Poland, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the fact that it was a tremendously important part of Europe for centuries. And this goes so deeply into the Polish identity. But of course, when we speak of Europe, it was in the vested interests of Russia, Prussia, Austria, to nullify this history of the grand days of the Polish past, to make Poland look as pathetic as possible, to justify the carving up of Poland and 123 years of partition. And so I think that the Poles kept this alive, but this within it is a deep, deep conflict. For example, if you look at Polish-German history, throughout the ages, there always has been this conflict between whose set of values, whose history, whose kind of past is in a sense valued. And this is one of those old conflicts which is finally, I think, being worked through, as you mentioned, between Germany and Poland, but it's taken a very long time to get to that point. And so when we look at the post-1945 era and this struggle for solidarity, a lot of the ideas and a lot of the conceptions that are so deeply ingrained in Poland do go back right to the beginning of Polish identity. And I think that the concept of freedom is very real here. I mean, I've interviewed so many people who actually remember what it was like for their city to be bombed in 1939, for them to lose their homes, for them to actually be dispossessed, have their country once again wiped off the map. This is something that if you grow up in North America, it's so alien as a concept that you simply have to talk to so many people to finally actually sort of understand that this is very, very real. This happened before, it could happen again. And this is so deeply ingrained in the Polish national identity. So I think that this concept and this fight for freedom is really the crucial concept in the Polish past and the Polish future as well.
Thank you very much. Professor Ziemer, would you like to?
Only about the national historical traditions, constitutional traditions, and so on. each country has a long tradition and a dignified tradition very often. If we had to respect the special traditions of each country, it would be extremely difficult to make decisions in Brussels. And when you so we have to make compromises, have rules of today. Look, Britain still today doesn't have the principle of the sovereignty of the people. Insofar, Britain is before the French Revolution. And this sometimes makes difficulties, and it's not by chance that we have these problems. But in the very beginning of the Roman treatise of 1957, there was the principle that after some time there should be not the principle of unanimity, but the principle of majority. And this was implicit in these decisions, in these treaties, so that there would at the beginning, economic community evolve in the direction of a political community. This was the real intention. The first president of the European Economic Community, Walter Hallstein, intended to go into this direction, but he was framed by de Gaulle. The empty chair of de Gaulle in the 1960s, beginning of the 70s, it was difficult. And now it is a very difficult process to learn, to live together, and to come to terms with each other. We are still in the middle of this discussion. But what is important is to have communities. The academic community, of course, is in the forehead. We can show societies how to go along. Erasmus and other programs given by the European Community Union give a chance for young people to meet others. All the Polish students and also Germans, which I had, who were Erasmus students, some were abroad, are coming back quite enthusiastically and saying, we have learned such a lot. We are better Poles even than before. They are patriotic, of course, but they are knowing this, the value of their own country better than before. And therefore, at the academic community, we have the privilege of knowing each other much better, and we should try to diffuse this in our societies.
If I may a little bit divert our discussion from constitutional aspects and legal elements of functioning the European Union nowadays, and before giving the word to the audience, because I believe there will be questions coming from the audience, I would like to ask one single question, which would be sort of a kind of intellectual experiment for everyone. I want to simply to hear what you think. In case you are made chief editor of the, okay, let's make it a Cambridge World History of the 20th century. And you're supposed to think of the kind of major themes or topics that you would like to include into that particular volume or a set of volumes. Would you include anything that is related to Polish history or any themes that touch upon Polish history? In your case, it might be 18th century, fine. As a Cambridge World History,
I'll try for the 20th century.
Because I'm simply trying to think in kind of global terms. And it's like if we can consider, if we have to cover such a vast material and so many geographical areas and issues, obviously we have to omit a lot of that. But then that's why I'm interested whether there is anything you think it should be inserted into that volume, because it shows kind of something more than kind of national or particular manifestation of something, but this is kind of part of a larger phenomenon that can be discussed with the Polish case. So whoever volunteers to tackle with this question first, please.
Well, I would say yes. A huge chunk of the Cambridge world history should have parts of Polish history which have been put aside, ignored, or whatever. If we just say talk about 20th century history, it's true. If you look at most of these sorts of volumes now, Poland has tiny little entries. Very often in histories of the Second World War, even the Warsaw Uprising isn't mentioned. You know, it's these things that sort of vanished from history. And in fact, I would say the Warsaw Uprising is probably not the most important aspect. I think that there's so many themes and concepts and things which happen in Poland, which are the kernel of, for example, the conversation about totalitarianism, because you have a very well-developed civil society that blossoms in the 1920s, for example, and into the 30s, and all of a sudden it's cut short by the two totalitarianisms through no fault of the Polish people, and all of a sudden they have to somehow try and survive. This enormous Polish underground state which develops. People like Kozłowski and all these tremendous figures. These are people who should be very well known on the world stage. I think he's going. And so this struggle for freedom, for what is right, is profound and very a profoundly important story in 20th century history. So whether you talk about the incidents like Katyn, whether you talk about even the 1920s war and the miracle on the Vistula, whether you talk about Polish-Jewish relations, if you talk about the invasion by the Soviet Union and Germany, if you talk about the struggle of Anders' army, if you talk about the Poles who fought in all sorts of fronts in the Second World War, just those things alone should be writ large in the Cambridge Book of History.
By the Oxford.
Not to mention, yes, excuse me, not to mention solidarity and the recreation of Poland after 1989 in this form, and its relationship to Europe and its relationship to Germany, its relationship to Israel. These are profoundly important things.
Thank you very much.
I think when we look at the 20th century history of Poland, we should see that the Polish case is not alone. Poland had many problems in common with other states of Central Europe, from the Baltic Sea to from the Baltic states to the Adriatic Sea. After the First World War, there was the problem of finding its place in the international system, in the state system, and there were problems of borders, quarrels of borders, sometimes poisoning the relations with immediate neighbors. For, say, Teschen, for instance. Today, we don't understand how this can spoil, such a matter can spoil relationships between two states during decades. On the one side, this outside dimension, and on the other side, we are in a region which has been for centuries multinational. And this is how to resolve the multinational problem. The states of Central Europe became independent in the 20th century. And they had, and other nation states had been founded in the 19th century or even earlier. And therefore these states of Central Europe tried to found their national state of their own, with similar problems from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and so on. And you have these problems in various countries. This is something we should look at, and also which were the lessons which we have drawn from this. We can observe that learning is still a matter of the recent years. In 1991, in the German-Polish Treaty on Good Neighborship, which we have been celebrating last year for 25 years, the German side wanted to have a an article that in villages or in towns where a German minority was, that there the signs, the names of the state were also in German. And the Polish side wrote into this treaty that the Polish side at the moment does not see a possibility to fulfill this wish. And then there was quiet. In 2005, without any German intervention, the Polish Sejm voted a law on national minorities, and now we have such tables in towns in Poland where Germans are living, where Ukrainians are living, Lithuanians are living, and so on. This was a matter of time, a matter of learning. And I think we should be optimistic that in a certain time, most of us at least, will learn to understand certain rules which had not been it had not been possible to learn for decades before. We should be patient there. We should be patient.
Professor Butterwick.
Well, I would try to sort of combine elements of both my predecessors here. I certainly don't think that everything the Cambridge or Oxford world history would include about Poland should be exclusively positive and should only warm Polish hearts. I would say, though, that the problems which Poland has experienced, especially in the 20th century, have been shared with other countries in the region. And some of the, if you want to say it, the faults, the less pleasant sides of Polish history in the 20th century have been shared with its neighbours. What I found, however, really sort of exceptional is a loaded word, but what I find very striking in Polish history is precisely this struggle for freedom that Alexandra was talking about. It can be summed up in the principle of nic o nas bez nas, nothing concerning us without our participation. And this is visible both in the nation's relations with other nations in a collective sense, and it's also visible internally in the relationship between society and its rulers. It is visible, for example, in the international arena during the time of the Polish-Soviet War, at a time when sort of the British imperial imagination, which has recently been so penetratingly analysed by Andrzej Nowak, was inclined to sort of cut a deal with the Bolsheviks to sort of confine Poland to a very small space, and you know, on the grounds that there were the great powers and that the small power should sort of, in Jacques Chirac's words, take every opportunity to remain silent. And the Poles wouldn't. They took on, despite British pessimism, with a certain amount of encouragement from the French once they realised that the whites had lost, the Poles took on the Red Army and won, and they made their own history, much to the displeasure of the British, because they were not willing to have their history made above their heads for them by the British and the Russians. It's also visible, that attitude of nic o nas bez nas, in the Second World War, of course, but in the case of solidarity. This nic o nas bez nas is one of the great solidarity slogans. The idea that an unelected elite subservient to Moscow should rule Polish society in a blatantly unjust and inefficient and corrupt and despotic and often cruel way was not acceptable to society. A say in how people worked, a say in how people were educated, a say in how people were allowed to worship. All these things underline the principle of nic o nas bez nas, and that is the attitude they brought to the European Union.
Excellent. Thank you very much for all your comments and discussion. I would like to give the word to the floor, actually, to the audience. So please, if you have any observations, comments, questions, this is the great moment to speak up.
Well, I can ask something.
Please.
I'm neither a historian nor an academic. But thank you very much. It's a fascinating talk. I'm an English person that recently moved to Poland. I was just wondering, early on you were talking about national histories, or nationalistic histories. And with sort of the current move here, I mean, I'm aware, by way of example, I'm aware that Narendra Modi's government in India, for example, is attempting to restrict access for Western academics to certain kind of archaeological groups and things, in order to sort of contain the kind of Hindustani version of their national history. Have you come across any kind of attempt by the political forces here to sort of restrict or change your your lines of research, or is it?
From my part, none whatsoever.
It's a general question.
No, I mean, not at all. And the thing is that as I mentioned briefly earlier, I lived in East Germany when and travelled to Poland throughout Eastern Europe before the collapse of the wall, and lived in an environment where history was dictated, officially from the top, and if you deviated from that in any way, you found yourself very quickly out of a job or whatever else. If you live in what has become very rapidly a Western liberal democratic society, academic life is the same. And there can be voices that say, you should write this, you should write that, and most people just say, well, that's a very interesting point of view, and they write what they're going to do anyway. I mean, this is the whole point behind intellectual, academic life in a democratic society, is that you have to have all sorts of different points of view, and you have to fight it out. You have to debate. You have to, say I don't agree, and then you come to some sort of understanding. And that's very, very, very alive here in Poland. I've never ever once, had a tap on the shoulder to say you shouldn't say that. Never. So we listen to various different points of view, and there are things that are being said that I disagree with, and there are things that are said that I completely agree with, and some things in the middle, and so on. But that's the liveliness of debate in this kind of society. Finally, thank goodness.
There's the constitutional principle of freedom of teaching and research, and this is safeguarded. What is interesting for historians is that we have access to all sources we are interested in. And when there are restrictions, this concerns Polish researchers as well as foreigners.
Any more questions? We still have a moment for taking one or two questions from the room.
I have
There are two questions, please.
I have a question and a comment. One thing is about history and writing history, and I'm thinking that, and you were saying that Polish intellectuals, historians tend to be territorial, coming from a different field. I would say that is probably the case with most countries. That kind of a territorial approach to national history. So it's maybe not exceptional. But I'm thinking about your question about, we are imagining that volume, the new version of the world history, and what would be, part for Polish history. And I'm thinking the trouble is probably, and this is what you are addressing somehow, is that at the point when the history of the world was written by Europe. So we're talking, about the history of colonization, of the world, when Europe is becoming the main player, Poland is being partitioned. And I think, for that reason, it may be difficult, and this is because you were saying that, the problems of Poland are not the problems either are unique to Poland, So I think that the problem is that Poland ceases to, is kind of, it's somehow is not maybe Polish case the most interesting one, because we're talking about that certain part of the history when Poland is deleted as if off the map, whereas so many important things worldwide are happening in the whole world, that in which, you know, certain countries like, you know, like Great Britain, we're talking about France, we're talking about Spain, when they are, you know, organizing the rest of the world. And I think that may be part of the problem, you know, how to talk about those countries that cease to, you know, that are somehow deleted from the public imagination, from historical European imagination, and thus from the world imagination, and how to insert them back into that imagination. You know, I'm working on actually American literary history. And I remember when I was reading the accounts of the debates around national identities in the 1920s and in the 1930s. And I remember that, for example, when they were referring to Poland, they were arguing that actually, you know, Poland didn't have a strong sense of identity as a nation state because it never colonized, which is not strictly true, but it never colonized the rest of the world, you know, so they were using that kind of a racial Darwinist kind of, you know, thinking. But at that point, what I was thinking was, okay, so Poland was deleted from intellectual debates at that time because it wasn't the main player, European player. So that's kind of my, you know, I was thinking exactly about that volume, and I was thinking that is the volume that would be of interest to the rest of the world, you know. So this is the question, you know, how to insert Poland back into, you know, into the historical map, you know, and that's probably that's why, you know, we're having this problem of not people being interested in Polish history.
If I may, I think other countries have that problem. Far worse than Poland. It's true that the very first history of Poland was written by a foreigner, by Gallus the Anonymous. But on the whole, the Poles have had plenty of historians to tell the story of Poland. Some of them were writing in the international language of Latin, you know, many hundreds of years ago. And even in the 19th century, in a period of statelessness, there was no shortage of sort of national histories, and some of these were published in other languages as well. So although they were at a disadvantage compared to the sort of imperial court historians of Austria, Germany and Russia, but the Polish case could be made. It was heard. People like Paderewski were able to put it to Woodrow Wilson during the First World War. And so although the Poles have been at a disadvantage compared to the great powers, you mentioned the sort of the colonial syndrome. There are very many countries and peoples in the world who've never been able to tell their own story in their own world and who've had it imposed upon them. I don't really think we can put Poland quite into that category.
If I could just add, you know, if you talk about the 123 years of partition, Poles didn't cease to exist. Poland, this political entity, did. But of course, there are histories of the Poles who lived through and were, you know, had tremendously fascinating histories as well. And there's just an extra note on the side, is that you mentioned earlier that the history is changing from perhaps European-led national history or European history, civilization, these traditional views of history, to global history and a different perspective. And in a very interesting way, Poland, I think Poland will play a very interesting part in that kind of history because it doesn't have this colonial baggage. And so Poland's relationship to the Middle East, to North Africa, to India, you mentioned India, is very different from, let's say, the British or the French one. And if you look at I'm just plucking something out of the air, but the relationship of Polish secret services now, for example, in some of those countries, how they're able to operate, how they're able to get around in ways that, for example, some of the old colonial powers just don't have this kind of access. But this is also becomes a positive aspect of the Polish past, precisely because it didn't have this colonial baggage.
There was one question coming in, and then it's okay, please.
I would like to ask Professor Richie in particular how the topic of transitional justice, by which I'm thinking of events after 1989, the Polish path for reconciliation. How would that topic, transitional justice, figure in your Oxford volume on 20th century European history?
Well, I'll just broaden it out a little bit and just talk about what I think is an extraordinary element of recent Polish history, which is reconciliation with, for example, with Germany. Let's just take that as an example. I mean, the courage that it took for the Poles to put this past behind them, and for example, the bishop's letter, which we were celebrating, and this hand of friendship to what had, after all, been, you know, an aggressor and a murderous one, I think is an aspect of contemporary Poland which should be writ large. I think that it took tremendous courage and foresight and depth and understanding that despite the things that had happened, that a positive future had to be built despite the hurt, despite the rage, despite all of these things. And I think that this is one example for contemporary Europeans of masterful overcoming of the hatreds of the past and to build something very positive. So I think it's a lesson to all of those regions in Europe. You mentioned Tesh, you mentioned how you can very quickly change the perceptions in one country or another against another nationality because of perceived or real slights and wrongs. And one has to make a choice to not focus on those things and to try and focus on the positive relationship that can be built in the future, which I think Poland has done.
Since the time is running out, there's one last question we can accept, and then please continue perhaps afterwards.
It would be rather a remark than a question, actually. Thank you, first of all, for that kind of debate, and hoping that it really is going to happen more often. I would refer much more to the perspective of Professor Butterwick, but what I think the main question which we're talking about here actually refers the most to the real core of what we can call European historical intellectual debate, because Poland was actually a very important part of the debate, but in the 16th century. It was Cardinal Kozłowski, was Alexandra Maximilian Fredro, who were then guys fully recognized all around the world, and not just because of lingua franca Latin, but also because they were really very important intellectual figures in what was the very core of the history happening, by which I mean, let's say, Counter-Reformation, and the very idea of absolutism confronting the very idea of limiting absolutism, let's put it this way. And in these areas, we were really a very, very, very important factor there. So what I think here is that we're probably going to be, once again, in such position, or we should maybe be, I mean, we both, if we are going once again to get into that kind of position, not politically or economically, but in terms of importance of some intellectual or political debate. And in that sense, I think that we really do have a chance for that. And maybe this is kind of an opportunity for you, especially that all of you referred to freedom as a kind of a crucial idea of what can be referred to as a Polish factor in work history, which I really like the very idea. But I think that the very experience of solidarity and the very experience of dissidents in Poland, because Poland was one and only country where it was a huge movement, because in every other country we also have that kind of intellectual movements or smaller movements, but not up to this extent. Could be kind of symptomatic sign to, well, let's say today European Union, we're talking about European Union, about really referring to what democracy, the very idea of civil rights are about. not what they're today changed to, which is usually a little bit crazy and a little bit far from the very idea when it was created. But let's refer to the guys for whom, let's say, democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of press, and so on, was really the core ideas of their heart, and they were willing to die or to suffer a lot for it. I don't think that today you will find that kind of attitude very common in Western world. And I think that kind of perspective might be quite interesting, really. As for example, Chantal Delsol, a very famous French philosopher, put it in one of her works, that this is kind of a heritage which should be used by Western world, and it's not. So,
Thank you very much. Any reactions to that?
Very briefly, if we're thinking about a major Polish intellectual contribution to the present, then it would be difficult to find a more cogent demolition of Marxist-Leninist ideology than Leszek Kołakowski's main current of Marxism. And if we're talking about the ability to mobilize the millions for freedom, then it will be very difficult to beat the combination of nie lękajcie się, be not afraid, and Solidarność.
And I think that's the great conclusion for our today's debate. Thank you very much to our speakers.